Women are born with pain built in. It's our physical destiny. Period pains, sore boobs, childbirth, you know. We carry it within ourselves throughout our lives.
This video is sponsored by Audible. With the weight of schoolwork over the past 6 years, I found it really difficult to read for pleasure. So since graduating, I've decided to get back into recreational reading, and this is where Audible has been really great for me. Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment. It offers the largest selection of audiobooks, anything from bestsellers to celebrity memoirs, as well as podcasts, guided wellness programs, theatrical performances, A-list comedy, and exclusive Audible originals that you won't find anywhere else. As an Audible member, you get 1 credit every month with access to thousands of titles from their entire premium collection, and those are yours to keep forever in your library. At the moment, I'm listening to the audiobook of Miyuko Kawakami's short novel, Breasts and Eggs. It's narrated by Emily Wu Zeller and Gina Yi, and it's an insightful exploration of womanhood in contemporary Japan. Through Kawakami's cerebral prose, you really get a sense of Japanese culture through the eyes of working-class women. Breasts and Eggs tells the story of 3 such women, as they struggle with the question of bodily autonomy in a world where a woman's access to her body is alienated both culturally and financially. It's an incredibly beautiful and unique book, and if you're into abject theory, which I'll be talking about in this video, then I strongly recommend it. With everything you can listen to all in one app, Audible is your playlist for life. New members can try Audible for 30 days free. So visit audible.com/broey or text broey to 500-500 to get your first month of Audible free. That's audible.com/broey or text broey to 500-500 to get your first month of Audible free. Now on with the video. I identify as a woman. And as a woman, I, both on and off screen, have always been characterized by emotion. And while this might not apply to all people who identify as women, I really relate to it. I get this twisted sense of feeling alive when I watch something on screen that produces a visceral reaction within me. It's in these moments that I feel truly tethered to the art I'm consuming. For centuries in art, the female body has been a site of spectacle. Ever since the Marquis de Sade published his erotic writings in the 18th century, spectators have taken great pleasure in watching emotion wrought on the female body. Back in 1975, Laura Mulvey took issue with this, arguing that spectatorship over the female body is a net negative, a voyeuristic, oppressive mechanism of what she calls the male gaze. For years, the agreed-upon idea was that women's bodies on screen are created by men for men. In these critiques, the male spectator is the assumed audience, but the female spectator is often neglected. No one ever stops to question, what does she like? This is the central focus of Linda Williams' 1991 essay, Film Bodies, Gender, Genre, and Excess. She explores the way film audiences are both drawn to and repulsed by excess on screen, using the example of her then 7-year-old son, who thoroughly enjoyed the terror of Nightmare on Elm Street, but drew the line at kissing movies, or weepies as Williams puts it. She distinguishes 3 genres that produce a strong physical reaction in viewers. The first is horror, designed to inspire feelings of terror, the second is porn, designed to evoke feelings of elation, and the third is weepies, which make you weep. These are called body genres, and what brings them together is that all 3 have historically been cast off as trash or fluff. Williams says, "What seems to bracket these particular genres from others is an apparent lack of proper aesthetic distance, a sense of over-involvement in sensation and emotion. These films, we think, manipulate our sensibilities. Tear-jerkers, fear-jerkers, or just plain jerkers appeal to emotions that fall outside the boundaries of societal values. Crying, fear, and even the vulnerability that comes after, are not exactly viewed as strengths in a patriarchal world." Yet, as I alluded to earlier, Williams finds that it's precisely within the body genres that women are the target audience
or the primary subjects. She argues, "There is thus a real need to be clearer than we have been about what is in masochism for women, how power and pleasure operate in fantasies of domination which appeal to women. Now more than ever, the body horror genre is coming into prestige. Swallow, Raw, and Possessor have all gained a great amount of acclaim in recent years. Most recently, Julia Ducournau's neon film, Titan, won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. It's garnered a huge amount of attention for its extreme violence and gore.
And at the moment, all of my female-identifying friends, including myself, are clamoring to see it. So we have to ask, why are women so drawn to body genres?
Yhara Zayd has an incredible video on the link between feminine sexuality and monstrosity in horror, tracing this history back to Carrie in 1976.
It's required viewing. But I want to add another element to Yara's point. What these horror movies and body genres in particular seem to offer up, and the reason they provoke such physical reactions within us, and maybe the reason they're so beloved by female-identifying audiences, is that they place a great focus on the abject.
Abjection, or the abject, is a theory developed by philosopher Julia Kristeva. It's a phenomenon by which human beings react physically to the sight of something corporeal, or in other words, something that threatens the distinction between the self and what is outside of it.
This is a difficult concept, but I think the experience of abjection can be best described in the feeling you get when looking at a human cadaver or corpse.
The corpse, a human in physical form with no signs of humanity within it, is a potent reminder of our own mortality. It's an uncanny blending of the self, our inner spirit, and the other, our physical material bodies. The corpse can make you recoil, but it can also evoke morbid fascination.
Kristeva extends this idea to a number of sites. Similar feelings can occur when we look at bile, blood, feces, or vomit, bodily fluids which are usually inside that have escaped. But it's not just about the body itself.
She also uses the example of footage from Auschwitz. These images are abject not just because they portray a violent mutilation of human life, but also because they symbolize a fragility of the law, a horrific display of the ultimate premeditated betrayal. In Kristeva's words, "It is thus not the lack of cleanliness or health that causes abjection, but what disturbs identity, system, and order. What does not respect borders, positions, rules, the in-between, the ambiguous, the composite."
Horror movies are a clear example of abjection.
In female-centric narratives, we often see imagery of menstrual blood, or the excessive consumption of meats and carcasses, symbolism that's relied upon a lot in the abject art movement. But another characteristic of abject art is its use of women as a site of transgression. Throughout history, the female body has been a scientific mystery, an intractable frontier. Even with the infinite advances in modern medicine today, women's health continues to be widely misunderstood. Mary Russo argues that women's sexual organs, or what she calls the cavernous anatomical female body, is deemed innately grotesque by its dark, damp invisibility. Much like a cave, it contains all the abjection of the world and should thus be shunned. In this sense, the female body is a marker of impurity. Abject art plays with this idea, presenting the female body as a liminal space where the discomfort of abjection can take place. But a lot of this art, and films in particular, are considered prestigious for this intellectual approach, which slightly defeats the purpose of Kristeva's theory.
For something to be truly abject, in her terms at least, it needs to be cast off by its audience. So what I'm interested in is female-driven art that, at the time or over time, is rejected by society.
MoveOn.org, needy, it's over. Life is too short to be moping around about some white trash pig roast. That's sweet, Jen.
For example, when Jennifer's Body came out in 2009, it was met with extreme backlash towards Diablo Cody, towards Megan Fox, and towards their film as a whole. Yhara also has a great video on the poor marketing behind Jennifer's Body, which led to its initial failure. I'll link it in the description. But all you have to know for this video is that audiences and critics hated this movie when it came out, largely contributing to a major downturn in both Megan Fox and Diablo Cody's careers.
The movie was seen as a failure in every facet of the term. Not scary enough, not funny enough, not exploitation enough, not feminist enough, and, most egregiously, not sexy enough.
And this is why it's an interesting case study in abject theory. Jennifer's body displays a lot of common tropes in female-driven horror. It's a bit of a rape revenge exploitation movie where Jennifer's sacrifice reads as an allegory for sexual assault. It's a monstrous girl movie where Jennifer's actual body transforms violently at multiple instances in the film, and it's also gross. Jennifer frequently projectile vomits, she sits on the floor and horks down fistfuls of meat, she animalistically cannibalizes her victims, but it's more than just the fact that it fulfills these tropes. What makes Jennifer's body abject is twofold. One, the grotesque transgressions of Megan Fox as a star, and two, the fact that audiences rejected the movie because they had no idea where to place it. As Kristeva writes, Abjection is immoral, sinister, scheming, and shady, a terror that disassembles, a hatred that smiles, a passion that uses the body for barter instead of inflaming it, a debtor who sells you up, a friend who stabs you.
I just thought, all right, this is it. Like, I'm going to write my crazy gonzo horror movie, and I want it to be female-focused. I want it to be about a female friendship, and I specifically want it to be about a girl who eats boys.
In 2009, people were repulsed by Diablo Cody's sleight of hand, creating a feminist exploitation horror flick with one of the most celebrated sex symbols of the time. Megan Fox was supposed to be the ultimate hot girl. What she was not supposed to be was a grotesque monster.
PMS isn't real, Needy. It was invented by the boy-run media to make us seem crazy. I just got Aquamarine on DVD. It's about this girl who's like half sushi. I guess she has sex through a blowhole or something.
Its uncompromising camp dialogue, transcendence of genre, and deeply unsexual preoccupation with Megan Fox made audiences uncomfortable with Jennifer's body. It was a fundamental betrayal of the male fantasy, and in true abject fashion, it was cast off as a bad movie. Only now are people beginning to embrace Jennifer's body as a feminist cult classic. We're now in a post-Me Too world where feminist horror and revenge thrillers are acclaimed, and Jennifer's body has finally found its place. But its legacy will continue to be dominated by the abject reaction it produced when it came out.
Abjection isn't just limited to horror. The increase in explicitly feminist media over the past decade or so has led to an expansion in what women are allowed to do on screen.
One piece of media that pioneered this expansion back in 2012 was Girls.
Surprise! I'm talking about Lena Dunham. Now, there are many fair criticisms about Lena Dunham and her show Girls.
Mainly that she has a tendency to portray New York like Lincoln, Nebraska, with her inability to write BIPOC people into her scripts, and that she has an overall painfully unself-aware public presence. But there's one type of criticism waged against Dunham in Girls that really bothers me. Girls is very frank in its portrayals of sex in the female body, particularly the body of Lena Dunham. She frequently appears fully naked on screen, and at the time it was pretty revolutionary to see a woman of proportions that were atypical for mass media in this light. Dunham is not skinny, but she's not fat. She's kind of in the middle, which is an in-between that we as consumers are not used to seeing, even though Dunham's body type is quite average for the general population of America. But not only is Dunham naked, her character Hannah is also a bit gross for TV. She poops, farts, burps, vomits, and performs many bodily functions on screen that repulse us. And of course, at the time, and perhaps even more throughout the years, Hannah's perceived slovenliness, and by extension Dunham's, have been increasingly indicted by the public.
There's obviously a point to Hannah's demeanor on Girls.
Rebecca Wanzo finds that Hannah's abject qualities are symptoms of her precariousness as a millennial writer living in New York. Hannah is having trouble with all the various aspects of her life. Her flimsy career, tumultuous love life, waning friendships, and struggles with OCD. Hannah, now that her well-off parents have cut her off financially, is precarious. And as Wanzo writes, abjection is often a principal sign of these characters' precarity. They inhabit spaces where they often recoil from others, and others recoil from them, and their constant association with the gross, things like dirt, vomit, and feces, are habitually signs of what emotional and economic insecurity has wrought. Hannah wears her abjection on her sleeve as a defense mechanism. If she's going to be precarious, she may as well set herself apart from others. In embracing the abject, Hannah is able to control her own identity at an age where she feels she has little agency over anything else. In Wanzo's words, claiming difference, alienation, isolation, and specialness is part of how Hannah shores up her identity, particularly as a writer. Girls imagines modes of women's creation in the face of a precarity that disrupts subjectivity and agency.
Yet the public's inability to grapple with a female character so blatantly abject, coupled with their revulsion towards Dunham's controversial star persona, has led to a widespread public rejection of Dunham, and by extension girls, as self-indulgent, annoying, and just plain gross.
The same goes for female comedians like Margaret Cho, Ali Wong, Whitney Cummings, Tiffany Haddish, and Amy Schumer.
Now again, there are many fair criticisms waged against these women, particularly Schumer, who has been widely accused of plagiarizing her jokes and frequently making racist comments in her routines and shows.
Yet, like Dunham, female comics seem to ignite a fury in audiences that goes beyond individual critique. We can fall into the old women aren't funny adage that 14-year-old boys like to spin on TikTok, but if we're to look a little closer at the through line between contemporary comedians like Cho, Wong, or Schumer, you'll notice that they tend to eschew a level of vulgarity or grotesqueness that rubs audiences the wrong way.
And there's this boy that I liked or whatever, and he was like, we was making out, and he was like, "Can I touch your coochie?" I was like, "Okay." And I let him touch it. And the next day, I was itching like a motherfucker. I was itching bad. And I was like, "Oh shit, something's wrong." And I went to my homegirl and I was like, "Girl, I think he gave me AIDS." She was like, "What's wrong?" I said, my coochie itching really bad. I'm pretty sure it's AIDS." And she was like, "No, Tiffany. Look, I heard my mom talking about this. You just need to it's something white. Yeah, mayonnaise. Put mayonnaise on it."
Joking about pooping one's pants or losing control of your bodily functions during intercourse, or having a lot of intercourse in general and talking about it at length to an audience, exposes a taboo. Of course, male comedians have been using vulgarity, edgy humor, and self-deprecation for years, but that's something we're used to seeing in popular media. The female body, on the other hand, is ornamental. As Maggie Hennefeld puts it, to be funny through one's grotesque bodily difference thereby offers an alternative means for pursuing freedom and belonging in a hyper-commodified, image-obsessed, perniciously unstable media environment.
Because I'm like that, like I was a fat girl, and a really fat kid, fat teenager, and I would always hang out with really skinny, beautiful friends, and we'd all go shopping, and they'd buy beautiful clothes, and I would get a mug, because I wanted something.
Much of the response towards Dunham and Schumer is wrapped up in framing fatness as something that is abject in itself, an excessiveness of bodily flesh that seems to transgress borders set by the media.
But in the case of Margaret Cho, these borders are both metaphorical and literal. She recalls in one of her stand-up routines a moment where one of the producers of her show, All American Girl, told her that the network was concerned with the fullness of her face on screen, going on to relay that they were concerned about how she was, quote, really overweight. According to Rachel Lee, Cho's abjection lies in the way she confronts the liminality of her fleshy, racialized body. In her routine, Cho says, "I didn't know what to say to that. I always thought I was okay looking. I had no idea I was this giant face that was taking over America. Here comes the face." Lee argues that this retort hyperbolizes the national crisis imagined to occur when a Korean face appears on screen. The event is likened to an invasion or a deluge of too much immigrant foreign body. So not only does Cho's abject body transgress the borders of femininity, it's also, according to Lee, a symbolic reminder of the myth of immigrant invasion, particularly that of yellow fever, a literal trespassing of borders. The racialized East Asian body is imagined in the West to be small, passive, and hypersexualized, yet Margaret Cho transgresses this symbolic order of Orientalism. Her comedy is thus perceived as abject.
I'm on a diet because a few months ago I was in Tampa, Florida at the airport, and this old man came up to me and he goes, "Excuse me, but are you Japanese?" No, actually, I'm Korean. "Oh, really? That's very interesting, because I was looking at you and I knew that you were not Filipino because I have very many Filipino friends, and you are not very Filipino because you are very husky."
It's easy to dismiss reactions to people like Dunham or the female comedians by saying, "Oh, well, they're just gross or annoying." But I think the answer is a bit more complicated than that. You thought I'd stop at Lena Dunham. You thought I'd stop at Amy Schumer. No. Since this is the month of Halloween, I figured it'd be best to scare you all with a bit of Freudian psychoanalytic feminist film theory.
Essentially, Kristeva uses Jacques Lacan's concept of the mirror stage to underscore her theory of abjection. The mirror stage is the moment when a baby or toddler witnesses themselves in the mirror for the first time. Until this point, the child has been developing an understanding of themselves through their surroundings, their mother, their father, their siblings, but upon looking at themselves in the mirror, they come to realize themselves as a material object, a human with a physical, and most importantly mortal, form. This is an incredibly uncanny experience. It doesn't necessarily need to occur in front of a physical mirror, but instead represents the process through which the child becomes detached from their mother and begins to develop as an individual being. For Kristeva, this stage is central to the child's indoctrination into a patriarchal social order, one that forces the child to reject the maternal and the feminine, which are potent reminders of their own mortality. After all, they were once inside the mother, and now they've been expelled from her into the physical world. For the growing child, anything feminine becomes abject. Kristeva writes, most melodramatically, "Out of the daze that has petrified him before the untouchable, impossible absent body of the mother, a daze that has cut off his impulses from their objects, that is, from their representations, out of such a daze he causes, along with loathing, one word to crop up: fear. The phobic has no other object than the abject. But that word fear, a fluid haze, an elusive clamminess, no sooner has it cropped up than it shades off like a mirage and permeates all words of the language with non-existence, with a hallucinatory, ghostly glimmer. Thus, fear having been bracketed, discourse will seem tenable only if it ceaselessly confronts that otherness, a burden both repellent and repelled, a deep well of memory that is unapproachable and intimate. The abject."
You can write this off as total outlandish bullshit. But it's hard to deny that when audiences look at the grotesque feminine on screen,
the uncanniness of Megan Fox's objectified body transforming into a cannibalistic monster, or of Lena Dunham's unconventional body experiencing pleasure or engaging in socially disruptive behavior, or of Amy Schumer or Margaret Cho disclosing stories about their genitals and bowel movements to a public audience for laughs. They reject it, or rather they abject it. The woman abjecting herself is the greatest horror of them all.
The grotesque feminine, according to psychoanalysts, is an existential threat, a fundamental taboo that needs to be cast off. So why on earth do abject women persist in popular media? If we're so repulsed by them, why do they continue to appear, and why do we continue to watch them?
Well, much as the heterosexual male spectator experiences pleasure at the sight of the objectified woman on screen, the female spectator experiences catharsis at the abject, a great release of social restraints. This media alienates and discomfits male audiences, but its abjection distorts social boundaries and images that confine women. For Kristeva, abject art is cathartic. She says, "The various means of purifying the abject, the various catharses, make up the history of religions and end up with that catharsis par excellence called art." And for Linda Williams, this catharsis is predominantly experienced by female-identifying spectators. Maybe the reason women are drawn to abjection is a similar reason that true crime is so popular among female-identifying audiences. There is power in viewership and voyeurism, power in watching the extremes of society displayed on screen at your behest. If heterosexual male viewers experience euphoria in watching power dominated over women on screen, then women who abject themselves on screen transfer this source of power to the female spectator. Maybe that's why a lot of feminist media has increasingly embraced the abject as the years go on. It's important to note at this point that the criticism against people like Lena Dunham and Amy Schumer as the ultimate champions of white feminism isn't exactly inextricable from their abject presences in popular culture.
As I said earlier, abjection is the state of being cast off. This exists in the societal sense as well, not just in art.
In her book, Revolting Subjects, Imogen Tyler uses abject theory to explore the various ways that abjection plays out among social groups, and the different ways it's experienced by the haves and the have-nots. She uses the example of how certain populations were abjected in Thatcher's Britain. When implementing stringent cuts to the welfare state, it was decided that certain populations, grotesque in their helplessness, were unfit to exist in society and undeserving of social handouts. This extends to many Western societies. In Victorian England, it was unwed mothers and sex workers. In contemporary America, it's impoverished Black communities, people with disabilities, people experiencing homelessness, and disenfranchised Indigenous populations, among others. For Tyler, this state of being cast off or abjected by society can be internalized. She argues, disgust is not just enacted by subjects and groups in processes of othering, distinction-making, distancing, and boundary formation, but is also experienced and lived by those constituted as disgusting in their experiences of displacement and abandon.
She references Mary Douglas's theory on purity, which I myself referenced to the horror of millions in my Parasite video. Remember this? Disgust is an inherently marginalizing tool used to create boundaries between different social groups. So the question is then, who gets to be abject today?
Rebecca Wanzo compares precarity in Lena Dunham's Girls with how it's explored in Issa Rae's Awkward Black Girl. She says, there may be freedom in a middle-class white girl associating herself with sexual abjection, dirt, and feces, given traditional representations of pure white womanhood. But perhaps unsurprisingly, a Black girl may resist or play with Western constructions of the concept. Black women, along with other people whose bodies have been historically cast off and discarded by society, do not have the same freedoms in popular media to be explicitly abject. White women, whose bodies have existed in the historical imaginary as chaste, restrained, and delicate, may embrace abjection because it transcends the boundaries of their established social order. But certain marginalized groups, Black people, transgender people, Indigenous people, acutely impoverished people, people with disabilities, and particularly anyone in these groups who identifies as a woman, have had to work for years and continue to work on making it inside the established social order altogether.
But what is the established social order anyway? Why does it get to decide who and what is abject? And is it something we should be striving towards at all?
This order, which creates narrow boundaries for what is socially digestible, completely flattens complexity, nuance, difference, and even the entire human condition. All human beings are inherently a bit abject. We are fleshy, we ooze liquids, we rot when we die, we are complicated and sometimes awful. And rejecting these fundamental traits, making them taboo, will get us nowhere. There is a liberatory quality to the abject. Rather than placing a moral qualification on it, we should understand it as an innate human experience that's shaped along social, cultural, and political lines. And since it's not going away anytime soon, we just have to figure out what to do with it. In her book, Against Purity, Alexis Shawwell attempts to map out a future where we let go of the idea of purity. A future where we stop clinging to some fantasy of an original wholeness, or a world that was once completely pure. She says, and this is quite beautiful, there is no primordial state we might wish to get back to, no Eden we have desecrated, no pre-toxic body we might uncover through enough chia seeds and kombucha. There is not a pre-racial state we could access, erasing histories of slavery, forced labor on railroads, colonialism, genocide, and their concomitant responsibilities and requirements. There is no food we can eat, clothing we can buy, or energy we can use without deepening our ties to complex webs of suffering.
The world has been marred since the beginning. All purity does is convince us that there's some fundamental flaw within us as human beings for being undisciplined or unruly.
For Shotwell, we need to move towards a constitutive impurity, which embraces imperfection not as a boundary to be policed, but one that is porous, that connects us to the earth. What she's getting at is that to live ethically, we have to confront impurity head on.
And I think this could be a wonderful, radical approach to abjection.
Abjection is best imagined as an artistic rendering of impurity, or a celebration of border crossing. Body genres and grotesque feminism contain a wonderful impurity within them, and rather than restraining the abject, or using it to cast others away, or limiting who it can be used by in the media, we should use it as a compass for unearthing all our complexities and contradictions.
Because at the end of the day, life is a bit gross.
Special thank you to Louis Osta, Syed Hassan, Malpertui, Cooper Stimson, Nina E., James Barcelona, Tenzing Mingmar, Jessica, Nadia C., and Greg Peter for supporting this channel.